Welcome. My name is Markus Wesaw, and I will be your facilitator for this Hazard Communication and Global Harmonization System presentation. This video presentation will survey the GHS requirements as they pertain to hazard communication. If you have any questions or comments, my contact information is listed on the screen. The objectives of this video presentation pertain to the labeling requirements for chemicals in the workplace and signal words. Each participant should understand how signal words are used and what they mean with respect to chemical labels. Additionally, participants will be introduced to the various aspects of hazard communication standards on labeling. For example, the basic label elements and precedents of hazard information will be discussed. That being said, let's move on to the basic label elements. As we begin this discussion, it is important to understand that when we speak of chemical labels, we are referring to those labels found on chemical containers in the work environment. Some containers, for example, could be a 55-gallon drum of some chemical, while other containers could be much smaller. Nonetheless, chemicals and their containers must be labeled appropriately in order for employees to not only identify the chemical therein, but to also understand the associated health, physical, and environmental hazards. Chemical labels will have the following components. The label for each hazardous chemical shall include the product identifier used on the safety data sheet, which is the name or number used for a hazardous product on a label or in the SDS. The labels on shipped containers shall include the telephone number of the chemical manufacturer, importer, or other responsible party. The label for each hazardous chemical that is classified shall include the signal word, hazard statement, pictograms, and precautionary statements. There are a few basic rules pertaining to the precedents of hazard information, so let's discuss them. Danger and warning are the only two signal words allowed. Words like caution and careful are not utilized within the Hazard Communication GHS framework. The signal word indicates the relative degree of severity of a hazard. The signal words used in the GHS again are danger for more severe hazards and warning for less severe hazards. Signal words are standardized and assigned to the hazard categories within each particular chemical. Some lower-level hazard categories do not use signal words. Only one signal word corresponding to the class of the most severe hazard should be used on a label. If the signal word danger is included, the signal word warning shall not appear. If the skull and crossbones pictogram is included, the exclamation mark pictogram shall not appear where it is used for acute toxicity. If the corrosive pictogram is included, the exclamation mark pictogram shall not appear where it is used for skin or eye irritation. If the health hazard pictogram is included for respiratory sensitization, the exclamation mark pictogram shall not appear where it is used for skin sensitization or for skin or eye irritation. Let's now turn our attention to hazard statements. What is a hazard statement? Hazard statements are standardized and assigned phrases that describe the hazards as determined by hazard classification. An appropriate statement for each GHS hazard should be included on the label for products possessing more than one hazard. The text of all applicable hazard statements shall appear on the label except as otherwise specified. The information in italics shall be included as part of the hazard statement as provided. For example, causes damage to organs, then we would state all the organs affected. Through prolonged or repeated exposure, state route of exposure if no other routes of exposure cause the hazard. Hazard statements may be combined where appropriate to reduce the information on the label and improve readability, as long as all of the hazards are conveyed as required. If the chemical manufacturer, importer, or responsible party can demonstrate that all or part of the hazard statement is inappropriate to a specific substance or mixture, the corresponding statement may be omitted from the label. Let's move on to precautionary statements now. Precautionary information supplements the hazard information by briefly providing measures to be taken to minimize or prevent adverse effects from physical, health, or environmental hazards. First aid is included in precautionary information. The GHS label should include appropriate precautionary information. There are 4 types of precautionary statements presented: prevention, response, storage, and disposal. The core part of the precautionary statement is presented in bold print. This is the text, except as otherwise specified, that shall appear on the label. Where additional information is required, it is indicated in plain text. When a backslash or diagonal mark appears in the precautionary statement text, it indicates that a choice has to be made between separated phrases. In such cases, the chemical manufacturer, importer, or responsible party can choose the most appropriate phrase or phrases. For example, wear protective gloves, / protective clothing, / eye protection, / face protection, could read something simpler such as wear eye protection. When full 3 stops appear in the precautionary statement text, they indicate that all applicable conditions are not listed. For example, in use explosion-proof electrical, ventilating, lighting, 3 full stops, equipment, the use of 3 full stops indicates that other equipment may need to be specified. In such cases, the chemical manufacturer, importer, or responsible party can choose the other conditions to be specified. When text in italics is used in a precautionary statement, this indicates specific conditions applying to the use or allocation of the precautionary statement. For example, use explosion-proof electrical, ventilating, lighting equipment is only required for flammable solids if dust clouds can occur, which would be in italics. Text in italics is intended to be an explanatory, conditional note and is not intended to appear on the label. Where square brackets appear around text in a precautionary statement, this indicates that the text in square brackets is not appropriate in every case and should be used only in certain circumstances. In these cases, conditions for use explaining when the text should be used are provided. For example, one precautionary statement states, in case of inadequate ventilation, wear respiratory protection. This statement is given with the condition for use. Text in square brackets may be used if additional information is provided with the chemical at the point of use that explains what type of ventilation would be adequate for safe use. This means that if additional information is provided with the chemical explaining what type of ventilation would be adequate for safe use, the text in square brackets should be used, and the statement would read, in case of inadequate ventilation, wear respiratory protection. However, if the chemical is supplied without such ventilation information, the text in square brackets would not be used, and the precautionary statement should read, wear respiratory protection. Precautionary statements may be combined or consolidated to save label space and improve readability. For example, keep away from heat, sparks, and open flame. Store in a well-ventilated place. And keep cool can be combined to read, keep away from heat, sparks, and open flame, and store in a cool, well-ventilated place. In most cases, the precautionary statements are independent. For example, the phrases for explosive hazards do not modify those related to certain health hazards, and products that are classified for both hazard classes shall bear appropriate precautionary statements for both. Where a chemical is classified for a number of hazards and the precautionary statements are similar, the most stringent shall be included on the label. This will be applicable mainly to preventable or preventative measures. An order of precedence may be imposed by the chemical manufacturer, importer, or responsible party in situations where phrases concern response. Rapid action may be crucial. For example, if a chemical is carcinogenic and acutely toxic, rapid action may be crucial, and first aid measures for acute toxicity will take precedence over those for long-term effects. In addition, medical attention to delayed health effects may be required in cases of incidental exposure, even if not associated with immediate symptoms of intoxication. If the chemical manufacturer, importer, or responsible party can demonstrate that a precautionary statement is inappropriate to a specific substance or mixture, the precautionary statement may be omitted from the label. Now, let's examine how labels are prepared. There is a significant amount of time and effort needed to examine how labels are prepared. In other words, label preparation requires a process to ensure that label communicates the health, physical, and environmental hazards to all interested parties. The first step is to consider the health and physical hazards that we have discussed in much depth in other modules. We must be able to determine the health and physical hazards in order that we may designate appropriately the hazard categories most relevant to the chemical. From there, we must determine what label elements are required. For example, a determination must be made as to the most appropriate pictograms, hazard statements, what signal word should be used, and what precautionary statements are most relevant. Once an idea has been formulated regarding how the label should be prepared, we must refer to Appendix C in the 1910.1200 standards or other comparable sources such as the United Nations Purple Book for guidance on how to create the label. Let's look at an example. It is important to note that there are numerous label classifications within Appendix C of the 1910.1200 standards. Once more, if you or your organization is outside of the United States of America, you may refer to the United Nations Purple Book for the exact same information because, as you can tell by now, it has all been standardized. You have the labeling requirement for acute toxicity oral listed on the screen. Firstly, you will see that the label contains a hazard category, an appropriate signal word, a hazard statement, and the skull and crossbones pictogram. Beneath this information, precautionary statements are made with respect to prevention, response, storage, and disposal. I would like you to turn your attention to the columns on prevention, response, and disposal for a moment. You will notice that under each of the precautionary statement columns, the chemical manufacturer must determine the specific verbiage needed to communicate more information about the chemical to those exposed to it. Therefore, what we have is a very good guideline on how to proceed with chemicals that have oral acute toxicity properties. Again, I want you to understand that with respect to the 10 health hazards and 16 physical hazards, there are similar labeling guidelines, but we will not be getting into those here, although I do encourage you to seek out this information on your own. Let's look at an example of a label for an imaginary chemical called toxaflam. Toxaflam seems to be a chemical substance that we may not want to be around too much. The skull and crossbones pictogram is exhibited, as well as the signal word danger. Additionally, you can clearly see the precautionary statements listed in a paragraph. Other information, such as the company's contact information, is also provided. Let's now look at how a label may be used on a container. In this example, we can see a 55-gallon drum on the screen where a large pictogram and the label are located. Because the chemical in this 55-gallon drum presents the primary physical hazard of flammability, the pictogram denoting the flame is larger than the label so that it can be clearly visible to those working in the area. The chemical label is slightly beneath and to the right of the flame pictogram. Many of the label elements we discussed in the prior example are also listed on this particular example. I hope that this example can clearly exhibit how the pictogram and label are used together to communicate the chemical hazards quickly and efficiently to all those parties who may be exposed or in the vicinity of the chemical container. Briefly, I want to make a quick comment on transport labeling. Where a pictogram required by the Department of Transportation on a shipped container exists, the pictogram specified for the same hazard shall not appear elsewhere. This concludes the video presentation on hazard communication GHS labeling. Feel free to contact me at your discretion should you have any questions about this subject matter. Thank you and have a great day.